Good evening, tributes, and welcome back to Panem Reborn. First of all, I'd like to thank Christian Blanco for creating the fanfiction series that this series is based off of, which you can find linked in the description below. Without him, this fanfiction of a fanfiction wouldn't exist, and I am very grateful to have the opportunity to have worked with him on Tales of the Hunger Games, and hopefully continue to work with him in the future. Secondly, I'd like to thank the incomparable Andrew McLean for providing a fair amount of the artwork used in this series. Before anyone calls the FBI on me, yes, I did ask for and receive his permission to use the art in the series. His blog is linked below as well. Also, I would like to thank Taryn Blevins, also known as Raby, for providing some art used in the lore episode. Not only has she helped me through a lot of the initial bumps in the road with Panem Reborn, but she has also served as an emotional support mother figure throughout many of my plotline crises. I'd also like to thank Anna, aka Octavianesthesia, for helping me think of some of the more satisfyingly morbid aspects of this series. And lastly, I'd like to thank all of you, the very excellent tributes of Panem, for watching this series and supporting a stressed, blessed, and distressed college student in her somewhat off-the-rocker ramblings. Also join the Tales of the Hunger Games /Panem Reborn Discord linked below in the description. Without further ado, let's dive into the Panem Reborn file of the day. To whom it may concern, the following document is the first file of the 200 entries in the dossier marked Third Incarnation, Panem Reborn, recovered from the remains of the Gaul Library some 50 years after its unfortunate destruction in a fire, cause unknown. We have also managed to obtain the valuable dossier pertaining to the first and second incarnations, known to researchers as the Tales of the Hunger Games files. The Tales files were collected and documented by researchers during the early days of the Third Incarnation to analyze and assess how the government known as the Capital had failed in keeping its power during the first and second regimes and to correct these errors the third time around. Eventually, we have learned from the Panem Reborn dossier that these were stolen from the researchers during a minor insurgency, as documented in File 88, Uprising. We have preserved the original files and tapes from the Tales dossier and the edits made by the Capitol's games historians and researchers during the Third Incarnation, not just for scholarly study, but also for historical documentation purposes and to better comprehend the timeline of Panem. However, we have edited and organized the Panem Reborn files to more accurately reflect our current knowledge of events that transpired during the entire Third Incarnation. These read rather differently from the third-person, primary source, Capital-centric Tales files that were prepared and analyzed by Capital historians in the Third Incarnation before their theft. Instead, they are our own scholarly interpretations of the Third Incarnation, intermixed with primary sources, as many first-person accounts have been destroyed or lost to time. We were fortunate enough to retrieve copies of the tapes for each of the games conducted during this time, courtesy of generous, anonymous donors wishing to preserve the history of Panem for future study and scholarly inquiry. The Panem Reborn files will include references to the Second Incarnation in the Tales files, as our analyst team attempts to connect the two periods together culturally and temporally. We want to take the opportunity to wish you good luck as you dive into the Panem Reborn files. You will need it. In the wake of his ineffectiveness in handling the rapid spread of the measles pandemic and the European nations, President Gall was quickly deposed as an angry mob stormed his mansion, though the vast majority of his top officials managed to escape and went into hiding. Even Capital TV could not avoid reporting on the events that followed. As all of Panem watched in shock, the mob consisting of furious Capital citizens, victors, and prisoners liberated during the rioting, flowed into the building and destroyed everything they could find. The rioters scoured the mansion for any sign of Gall, but it was eventually Tritica MacDonald, victor of the 100th Hunger Games, who located the president sitting on the toilet in the second-floor restroom. The looters were immediately called to the location as a frantic President Gall attempted to at least pull up his pants before he was dragged off the toilet amid jeers and cheers. The rioters then marched the president down the stairs and outside, where an even larger crowd had gathered to witness the events unfold and were gleefully rejoicing in the sight of their former leader being tugged down to his swimming pool in just his snake-printed briefs. Together, all of the living victors of the Hunger Games, except for Rubius Dalton, pushed their way to the front of the crowd, and each one placed a hand on Gall as they collectively tossed him into the pool. Chief Jaworski, victor of the 87th Hunger Games, held his head down until a member of the crowd used a noisemaker to sound a mocking cannon for the president as his drowned body was displayed amid wild cheers. In the aftermath of this incident, a new leader was needed to restore Panem to order. Though President Gall's top advisors had gone into hiding to avoid suffering the same fate as him, all of Panem hopefully turned to Amelia Cardew, one of the former president's most well-known dissidents and an avid supporter of abolishing the Hunger Games. She was soon elected to be the interim president until more formal decisions could be made as to the future of Panem. While President Cardew quickly instituted many health measures that slowed the spread of the measles, enforced by peacekeepers around the nation to ensure citizens were not skirting the guidelines, she also swiftly dealt with the European nations and brokered a temporary international peace treaty, known as the 30 Years' Treaty. During this time frame of 30 years, Panem would focus on rebuilding its infrastructure and agree to stop holding the Hunger Games, in exchange for being undisturbed by all European nations. Within a few months, the measles had been somewhat contained in Panem, though this had been considerably slowed by the lack of medical technology available to combat the disease, and many lives were lost in the process. In addition, damage from all of the looting after the 100th Hunger Games was repaired along with much of Panem's infrastructure. However, after just these few months of peace, President Cardew could sense unrest in the capital due to a lack of entertainment, which created low morale all around. Therefore, she took the stage at Snow Square for a surprise announcement that would shock the nation. Reneging on her deal with the European nations, President Cardew declared to all of Panem that she was revoking her abolishment of the Hunger Games, and that the reapings for the 101st Hunger Games would commence the following year. However, at this time, due to their infighting, the European nations were all too weakened to muster enough of a threat to stop this games from happening in Panem. The announcement was immediately met with delight from capital citizens and outrage from the districts, whose previous victors staged a unified public protest on the streets of the capital just weeks before the 101st Games was set to commence. The ongoing complications of the pandemic, as well as the promise that she would abolish the Games, brought much negative attention to the previously beloved president. Instead of backing down, she insisted that the Games go on. Indeed, President Cardew ordered peacekeepers to swarm the streets and capture any victor they found protesting. Several of the most elite squadrons of peacekeepers in the nation carried out these orders, resulting in the deaths of many victors and the imprisonment of the rest. All of the eyewitness accounts we obtained describe the scene as a massacre, with the blood of some of Panem's most respected citizens flowing through the pristine rainbow streets of the capital. Rubius Dalton, victor of the 86th Hunger Games, was defenestrated and subsequently run over by a vehicle on the road. As usual, a male and female tribute was reaped from each of the 11 remaining districts for the 101st Games. Yet poor planning and insufficient time put into creating an arena and orchestrating the flow of events resulted in a disaster of a Games that many capital citizens found to be underwhelming, according to one primary source. Most of the tributes died of illness within the first 2 days, as it was revealed that one tribute was infected with the measles and had spread it to the majority of the other tributes. In fact, the Games were so embarrassing, with a lack of commentary and an arena consisting of an existing abandoned warehouse in the capital, that President Cardew ordered for them to be ended early in order to start over. Peacekeepers flooded the warehouse and shot down the remaining 4 tributes, who were all in a weakened state after being exposed to the measles at the poorly ventilated warehouse. This caused another outcry in Panem, as capital citizens were angered at the anticlimactic ending to the Games, and district citizens were enraged that their tributes did not have a fair chance to win. President Cardew was deposed almost as hastily as she had been elected, disgraced and exiled from the nation. A temporary government consisting of representatives from various notable fields in the capital was appointed to serve in her place. These individuals continued to manage Panemian affairs, eventually halting the spread of the measles altogether and restoring infrastructure to its full capabilities. However, they refused to release the imprisoned victors of the Second Incarnation, fearing more protests and opposition. For a few decades, with the promise of no more Hunger Games and the sufficiently distracted European nations, Panem seemed to finally be at peace. Yet it was by a chance meeting that an intoxicated Panamian official, who had been part of former President Cardew's administration, revealed in a confidential meeting with some high-ranking European diplomats in the year 132 that President Cardew had made an ill-advised attempt to bring back the Hunger Games, unintentionally revealing that the 30 Years' Treaty had been broken long ago. At this time, most of the European nations had resolved their internal conflicts with peace agreements, meaning they were able to focus more on foreign affairs, including relations with Panem. Immediately, the diplomats reacted with shock and fury, unable to believe that their peace treaty with Panem had been broken so callously and so soon after it had been created. The officials present at that fateful meeting reported the information back to their superiors in their respective countries, resulting in a diplomatic crisis for Panem, a dire situation that seemed to be irreparable. The damage had been done. All of Europe was livid that Panem had failed to uphold its end of the treaty and deeply distrusted the nation, knowing its shadowy history. Suspicious that Panem was going to continue to be untrustworthy and was just waiting for a potential chance to reinstitute the Hunger Games and attain its former level of power, the European nations gave its leaders 30 days to commit to a proactive plan in which they would agree to never hold the sadistic Hunger Games for the rest of the nation's existence and uphold all future agreements. The Council debated for 29 days before admitting that it could not rule out the possibility of Hunger Games occurring in the future, citing capital citizens' impatience at the lack of games for the past 20 years. This was all the European nations needed to confirm their plan of action. As soon as Panem returned its verdict, they returned a verdict of their own to its top officials. The European nations were going to war against Panem. Panem was broken. In the ashes of the Great War with the European nations, the country stood in a state of ruin, streets strewn with crumbling building structures, livelihoods destroyed, families torn apart, and everywhere the smell of death. Panem was silent. Elsewhere, victory bells rang throughout Europe, signaling a glorious win and the beginning of rebuilding into a new era. But there was a dark side to the end of the war. As with every war, the moment freedom and democracy were accomplished, the invaders withdrew back to the comfort and safety of their own homes, leaving the invaded to struggle alone. The districts were hurting, torn from all they had ever known and without aid or guidance. Fearful and reclusive, they began to rebuild slowly after the war. Though they had been freed from the shackles of wartime, the immense damage to land and natural resources that had been inflicted during the war had taken a great toll on their ability to recover from the razing and destruction of their lives and lands. Yet some districts were not as fortunate as others. The outer districts, notably 10 and 11, were hit especially hard by the conflict. They had never had many resources in the first place to expend on the war or upkeep, and were stretched thin as a result of many destructive battles waged largely in their territory. District 14 was left alone by Panem, not wishing to return to the site of its humiliating failed experiment. Unfortunately, any relevant files on Panemian expatriates or District 14 individuals involved in Panemian affairs were likely destroyed in the tragic fire that struck the Gaul library. We may never know what became of these groups, or perhaps one day they will step forward to share their stories. District 12 remained an inaccessible zone for ordinary citizens, attached to the former District 13 and branded a forbidden area after the events of the 100th Hunger Games. Control of medical resources and production is known to have been transferred to capital laboratories after District 12's takeover by the European nations, although these laboratories often struggled to keep up with the demand for medical supplies across the districts. Despite this, there were still some advocates in the capital for a reclamation program to stage a coup in the former district and replace its population with loyal citizens of Panem. But the government had other priorities. The subsequent legislation and development for this idea would not be reviewed for many years. With the European nations nursing their wounds and attempting to recover their own infrastructures, the districts were left to fend for themselves and reclaim their property from the war. Even the former District 12, referred to as Virginia by those with European affiliations, was soon ignored due to the greater domestic concerns of its liberators. After a period of scrambling for a solution, councils of diplomats were chosen to represent each district in the former Panem to mediate discussions about healing the broken nation. But these attempts at mediation did not go well. District leaders, elected in the state of emergency after the war, could not reconcile their own district's needs with those of others. Arguments soon broke out about everything from boundaries and sharing of resources to allocation of relief supplies. Despite the diplomats' best efforts, tensions rose to a breaking point, and it soon became clear that the districts could not control their infighting. And thus, only 2 years after the end of the Great War, in the year 134, Panem once again went to war. But this time, it was not against France or the Alpine Republic or Germania or any other nation. It was fought from within. We now believe from surviving records that the first declaration of war issued was between Districts 3 and 6 over a boundary dispute near the former Lake Erie and its local town. The valuable resources provided by the lake, including mostly clean water and some surviving aquatic life, were a source of contention between the two districts. District 6 wanted the water source for hydroelectric power to help reconstruct its factories, while District 3 wanted it to secure drinkable water and some fish for its malnourished population. The high stakes of this conflict were believed to have caused it to boil over past any hope of a return to peace. At the time, most districts blamed District 6 for the conflict. They perceived 6's standoffish behavior as the manner of bullying usually perpetuated by the capital. Tensions continued to escalate, now on a nationwide scale, as the rest of the districts slowly took sides in the argument and entered the fray against each other. District 11 accused District 10 of greed and of secretively breeding dairy cows in competition with its own. District 5 argued that District 8 had received more relief supplies despite 5 needing more for its people, some of whom were suffering radiation-induced illnesses after the power plants had been bombed during the war. District 9 asserted that District 1 had been hoarding supplies left over from raids on the capital instead of sharing them with other districts. Districts 2, 4, and 7 were involved in an explosive conflict over who should have been responsible for taking in capital refugees and new AVOXs that had been created by the capital in recent years. Finally, it was District 3 who snapped first. In a guerrilla standoff with some angry citizens of District 6 demanding to know why they were being relocated out of the Lake Erie area, a militia member from District 3 fired a warning shot at the unarmed civilians. Immediately, the other districts heard from indignant District 6 officials about this offense, and even the diplomats could not quell the rapid flames of war being fanned by their own people. Unfortunately, the districts were embroiled in the beginning of a civil war. During this long and hard-fought crisis, in which districts sought to establish dominance and redirect Panem's resources to their own regions, one particularly cunning woman had an idea that would prove to, once again, be the downfall of the districts. Gloria Steele, a former deputy mayor of District 2 during the Great War, was well known for her stern presence and calculating intellect. Realizing that the loss of life and damage to her district would be heavy, immediately after rebuilding it, she decided to end District 2's part in the Civil War by taking in the contested refugees from the capital. This proved to not just be a strategic move, but a beneficial one. In doing so, District 2 discovered that many of the capital refugees, excluding the AVOXs, were angered and frustrated with the district's inability to handle their own problems. Many held firm convictions that the districts truly could not survive without the capital. Begrudgingly, Gloria Steele and the other leaders of 2 had to admit that this perception seemed correct. Without the capital's guiding hand, they had descended into a barbaric war against each other, with no neutral force to take charge and resolve the situation, for even diplomats had their loyalties in the end. And knowing this, Gloria Steele and the other leaders of District 2 made a deal with the leaders of the surviving capital citizens, a deal that would shape history. The leaders of District 2 met with Andronicus Mace, the de facto leader of the remaining capitalites. Youthful, ambitious, and bold, he had become a top advisor to the War Council during the Great War. Now he was 32, and he used the charisma he had learned while in office as an advisor to charm Gloria Steele and her supporters. Together, the district and Mace's faction of capitalites cooperated to launch a cunning plan to solidify Panem as one nation once more. To enact this plan, the two factions realized they would need to work through the warring districts one at a time. Gloria Steele immediately identified District 1 as one of the least invested in the war due to all of its power being spent defending itself reluctantly from District 9. Though the leaders of District 9 were on the warpath, the leaders of District 1 were very receptive to District 2's offer of mutual aid if they would pull out of the war. It also helped during the peace talks that these two districts had always been closely allied in past incarnations of Panem. District 1 laid down its weapons, and District 2 declared it under its protection, stalling any intervention from a fearful District 9 for the moment. From there, the alliance of two districts recruited District 4 by proposing the same deal. If District 4 withdrew from fighting District 7, it would receive a cut of 1 and 2's resources. From here, the growing alliance brought in 7, although the district leaders agreed to join the new League of Districts in spite of its own suspicions. To cease the infighting, District 2 reminded these other groups that it had taken in all of the capital refugees and AVOXs instead of continuing the war, which the leaders all grudgingly admitted was true. Together, under the united goal of bringing the districts together and ending the senseless war, these districts helped untangle diplomatic disputes and ensure each district was handled according to its needs. District 2 was particularly a force of diplomacy, something quite unexpected for its formerly militaristic citizens. The leaders helped other districts compromise on boundary disputes and direct resources to wherever they were most needed, even donating some of its own to the citizens of Districts 5 and 8 to ensure neither district resented the other's amount of supplies. Eventually, with the coalition of districts slowly growing as each group laid down their arms in favor of the new solutions and compromises brought by the League of Districts, peace finally came to the nation. Even Districts 3 and 6, the original combatants in the war, reluctantly came to a ceasefire and soon agreed to join the League and end their individual conflict. Little did most of the districts know, this peace league was all a facade. The district leaders convened after the war officially ended in the year 141 to decide upon governance of the newly united League of Districts. As the leader of the faction which had done the most to reunite the districts, Gloria Steele was invited to speak first at the conference. She congratulated the districts on achieving a peaceful resolution and for not allowing the civil war to further divide the people of Panem. Upon hearing this, several of the district leaders began to murmur, objecting that Panem was a name that should only be used when referencing the past, not this new and democratic present. Instead of acknowledging these comments, Gloria simply swept her arm to the right with a cold and calculating smile. Into the chamber arrived a group of former capital citizens dressed in their finest clothing, a far cry from the bedraggled refugees taken in by her district in the preceding year. She then introduced to the stunned district representatives their new leader, none other than the clean-cut, placidly smiling Andronicus Mace. Deliberately, eyes bright as she realized that their plan had come to fruition at last, Gloria informed the astonished district leaders that they were wrong. Panem would be reborn after a decade of fighting, Panem would be renewed, and Panem would be guided by none other than its newest leader, President Andronicus Mace. President Mace switched on the televisions on the walls, revealing that during this meeting, peacekeepers from District 2, originally sent to other districts under the guise of protection during the Civil War, had all staged coordinated coups within each district. Footage captured on the televisions showed peacekeepers forcing the district governments to swear fealty to the capital and President Mace under penalty of death. Instantly, protests erupted from the district representatives in the room, with some breaking down into tears and others shouting oaths at Gloria Steele for her betrayal. However, the peacekeepers present for security purposes were under Gloria's command, and they quickly subdued the most vocal of the district leaders. With no other choice, under the watchful eyes of peacekeepers and capitalites, each district leader signed a written agreement to turn over the best of their resources to the capital and become once again a constituent of Panem. The rise of the capital had truly begun once more. For her role in assisting with the creation and execution of this new plan, Gloria Steele was made a top advisor to President Mace and granted housing in the new capital once it was rebuilt. In addition, District 2 was granted special access to the new capital's training facilities for peacekeepers. With the remaining districts kept in line by the military threat posed by District 2, the capital was reconstructed over the course of the year and restored to its former glory in both architecture and power. Avoxes were brought back into existence by the mass capture and forced glossectomy of the most rebellious figures in the districts. President Mace quickly ascended to his new position as the leader of Panem and was quite aware of what needed to be done to subjugate the disgruntled districts during his regime. President Mace decreed that the Hunger Games would once again commence in the year 142, starting with a redo of the 101st Hunger Games. Each remaining district, save for the defunct District 14 and the European-controlled District 12, would provide one male and one female tribute each year to fight in the Games and reassert the capital's power. But this time, there would be additional security and extra precautions taken. A head game maker would be selected from among those who had served the capital abroad in Europe during the Great War, as President Mace wished to avoid any concerns of disloyalty in the early years of his regime. However, the reinstitution of the Games for capitalites' entertainment and humbling the districts was only the first step to revolutionizing his reign over Panem. Andronicus Mace's second act as president was the main act for which he is still known today to historians. Having witnessed European, specifically French, forces invading his homeland for years as a young man, and having survived all of these invasions himself despite his prominent role in capital society, there was no way he could allow such a transgression to go unpunished in his new role. In addition, he foresaw that France's varied local economies could benefit Panem by lifting burdens of production on the existing districts. Most of Europe had been so focused on rebuilding its own infrastructure in the aftermath of the Great War that the civil war among the districts, and subsequently their fall to the power of the capital, had gone almost entirely unnoticed. And President Mace understood one fact which his predecessors had not, that the capital would only harm itself by repeating its former mistakes, namely attacking France from Paris, its largest and most well-guarded city. So President Mace sent Panem's 10 most elite legions of peacekeepers, known as the 10 Terrors, under cover of a foggy night and morning to dock at Land's End, a remote coast area in the former District 14, and travel across the Canal de la Manche to the coast of Normandy. No French forces were present to stop the surprise invasion, nor were they present or aware as the 10 Terrors quickly secured the entire southwest area of France from Normandy down and rapidly expanded into central France. The French government in Paris frantically began to realize that its country was being disemboweled from the inside out, as the reports began piling in from Bordeaux and Limoges and Nantes, but it was far too late. Over the several days it took to capture southwest and central France, President Mace had sent more and more elite battalions of peacekeepers through the Normandy checkpoint, ensuring there was no shortage of invading forces. As the battalions expanded into the southeast of France and the Provence region, it was clearly too late for the French government to call for help from its allies around Europe, or for any other nations to mobilize their own soldiers in defense of France, and its own forces were badly outnumbered. In the end, after securing the Alsace region and closing in on Paris from all sides, the President of France surrendered to Panem. As part of the conditions of surrender, President Mace forced the other recovering nations in continental Europe to sign the Pan-Europe Agreement, stating they would not in any way attempt to interfere with the takeover of France. In return, he agreed to not attack them as well with his large numbers of troops still active in France. This unique strategy of subjugation by peace treaty would later be termed militant diplomacy by historians. With Panem fully restored at last, now preparing to annex its District 15 after so many years of nursing the wounds of loss, President Mace's groundwork was now complete. Having seen the mismanagement of the district's resources during the Civil War and subsequent League of Districts, he had become much more attuned to resource allocations and was able to help speed up the rebuilding efforts that had been occurring around France since the Great War with Panem's own supply chain. President Mace then faced a dilemma of how best to incorporate District 15 into Panem's economy. France had such a wide variety of exports before the war, each coming from different regions of the country, that he had difficulty deciding if it should be condensed into a single industry. To combat this confusion, he divided France into sectors, just as President Gaulle had once done with District 14, and all 12 to 18-year-olds would be eligible to be reaped from the district, regardless of their sector. Sector A, which included Paris and the northwestern area, would become the Performing Arts District. This would produce musical and performing arts equipment, art supplies, and performers for capital parties and events. Sector B, which included the Alsace region and the northeastern area, would relieve some of the production stress on the existing District 11 by providing dairy products such as cheese and milk to allow 11 to focus on fruit and agricultural production. Sector C, which included Bordeaux and the southwestern area, would produce wine and other alcohol products, again easing pressure from wine-producing District 1 in the continental area of Panem. Lastly, Sector D, which included the Provence region and the southeastern area, would produce perfumes for the capital and also serve as a tourism destination for capital elites. After the annexing of France, Panem was prepared for a new era under the guiding hand of the intelligent and careful President Andronicus Mace. Capital citizens rejoiced at the exciting prospect of the return of the Hunger Games once more and were satisfied that they had once again proven that the district's own naivety was their downfall. The only task remaining was for President Mace to choose a new head game maker. For this, he was presented with a series of candidates, ranging from military commanders to engineers to relatives of former game makers from the second incarnation of Panem. In the end, the candidate who stood out the most to him was Nova Marin, a fresh-faced but highly talented young engineer. Nova was known as a nonconformist in general, but they had promised in their application that they would deliver games which would ensure the capital was both feared and respected by any who might attempt to undermine its authority. They were a former television programming engineer who had worked on the front lines during the Great War and had proven themselves time and time again, truly believing in the ideal that the districts could not survive without the guidance of the capital. As a result, President Mace selected Nova Marin as the first head game maker of the risen Panem under tight scrutiny for the first formative years of these new games. Commencing in the year 142, these were advertised as the games to restore the capital's glory. Having completed his rise to power, with the aid of a certain unscrupulous District 2 leader at his right hand, President Andronicus Mace prepared to lead Panem into the future as a dominant world power once more.